When I first started the Silent Hill 2 remake, I approached it expecting to be thrust into a world that would thrill me with mystery and psychological terror. A world that would offer a myriad of abject experiences that would challenge my expectations of the reality within the game. But I did not expect to find a haunting allusion to the effects of truth and denial, woven into a tapestry of engaging plot. So after my full playthrough, the following is my understanding and how effectively I believe the narrative was conveyed. Welcome to a series I'm super excited to start that I've titled Narrative Breakdown. And a huge thank you to Gareth Weil for the logo. His Instagram is in the description if you want to commission something yourself. Let's get started. Immediately, I was presented with an unsettling, eerie atmosphere. I was alone, the game wouldn't let me leave, and most importantly, I began my relationship with the protagonist, James Sunderland. More on him later. The narrative hook used, a man who believes his wife to be dead only to receive a letter from her 3 years later, is captivating and serves to offer us a plot twist later in the game. I like how, with no prior knowledge of their relationship, the opening of the game contextualises it. James is presented emotionless, seemingly struggling with depression, and despite stating that his wife is dead, he's here, at Silent Hill. He doesn't immediately disregard the letter. It's given him hope, maybe? The subtext enables us to view their relationship as a loving one with a tragic ending. Mary's died of an illness, rendering James unable to fulfill a promise to bring her back to Silent Hill. Or so I believe at this point. Anyway, we're invited to follow James's quest to understand what is happening around him, and the writing encourages us to empathise with him and the arduous journey he is on. For me personally, I hoped Mary was alive, that I was about to embark on the always welcome narrative structure of the hero's journey. This expectation, whether intentional by the writers or not, was the catalyst for my enjoyment of what was about to unfold. That's when it happened. My immersion and the excitement were to be broken. By James. Let's talk about that quickly. Third-person narratives mean that detailed and consistent characterization is paramount. When following a specific perspective, our immersion in this world relies on the dialogue and actions of the character, as well as their reactions, movements, decisions, and even the expressions they make need to all not betray the character's verisimilitude. They need to be consistent. Unfortunately, consistency doesn't necessarily translate to engaging, because James is consistent, especially in his behaviour. It's just that his behaviour is always absurdly bland and vacant, impossible to relate to. Whilst he does push the narrative forwards with his impulsive decisions, demonstrated to us as he throws himself into any holes and drops and toilets that he can find, without emotion or some form of internal monologue, it becomes jarringly confusing why James makes the decisions that he does. We don't know much about him. We don't understand why he is so accepting of the environment he's in. He's astonishingly unfazed by the atmosphere, the creatures, and the encounters that he has with the other characters in the town. For me, James is one of the weakest parts of the narrative, providing us with an unsatisfying, unfulfilled role as an engaging protagonist. A disappointment frequently amplified by his unrelatable actions. Anyway, this series is called Narrative Breakdown, not Character Assassination, so let's begin exploring the narrative of Silent Hill 2. Obviously, the main caveat here is that the game has multiple endings, so knowing the writer's true intent is difficult without doing any research into it, which I have not. My conjecture will purely explore the events as they unfolded for me, and I'll be honest, I'm genuinely surprised with how I felt about the ending. So, Silent Hill, disturbing and masterfully unsettling. The town is enveloped by a fog that operates as a persistent and overwhelming force that relies on one of humanity's oldest fears to convey terror, the fear of the unknown. Our first stop was down the trail to a cemetery. A little too appropriate for what the game was going for, but surprisingly I was already meeting another character, Angela. Alone in a graveyard, James approaches her in the most unrelatable manner possible and creeps up on her, tapping her on the shoulder. I was so confused by his behaviour here. Seriously, what is going on? Angela sets the tone for the rest of the game by informing us that there's something off about the town, which is probably the least subtle foreshadowing the writers could have gone for. I'd argue it would have been more engaging for us to explore a part of the town in isolation and discover this information for ourselves. But alas, the plot progresses and we learn both characters share a similar goal: find someone in Silent Hill. I like this decision. It quickly forms a connection between James and Angela, allowing a comforting understanding of what the other might be going through. So, imagine my confusion when they decide to explore separately. Sure, you could make the argument that James is isolating himself intentionally due to his noticeably disillusioned state of mind, and that Angela doesn't want to go anywhere with the strange man who just jump-scared her. But even in these circumstances, I maintain that any two people would make the decision to at least travel to the town together, learn more about the other and the person they are looking for in case you happen across them. Now, I only know the lore that I was given during my playthrough, so if the fog or some other supernatural force is affecting their behaviours and decision making, that would add some understanding. But given that the game doesn't tell me this at the beginning, it felt like plot convenience. In fact, most of the plot progression is derived from the simple fact that the game needs James to be in certain places at certain times, meaning that subsequently, several of his unrelatable and hard to believe decisions prevent me from becoming invested in his character, his fate, his reality, and instead cause me to ruminate in frustration and confusion. Given the events of the story being communicated through the possibly unreliable perspective of James, it shouldn't be up to me to rationalise his actions. That information should be conveyed through subtext. The writing and the game should give me an understanding of why this man is just happy to jump into seemingly bottomless black holes in the ground. James isn't even certain his wife is alive, that this is real, yet he stalwartly endeavours to endanger himself. His determination and resilience juxtapose what we already understand about his character. James appears to be a broken man, a shell of his former self, but apparently no feat of endurance, ability and athleticism will dissuade him from pursuing a person he doesn't even believe could be here. How can I possibly champion this enigma of a man? Well, heading into town, I wasn't sure what to expect. I vaguely remembered scary nurses and a big guy with a pyramid-like helmet from the original game, but nothing else. Exploring and hesitantly poking around with charming enthusiasm, I was suddenly confronted with my first enemy, a human-ish thing. On first glance, my immediate impression was that people had been experimented on in some mental asylum, if I can still say that. The design was emblematic of dehumanization, aesthetically an excellently designed bit of cannon fodder for me to beat up. It was a little unusual that James didn't really question his actions here as he begins to slaughter everything he comes across, but I guess he is defending himself. Still, it would have been interesting to see James question the morality of his bloodshed, to see him attempt to reason with everything he faces. Instead, he defaults to massacring everything in his path without a second thought. After the first encounter, I'm honestly amazed he didn't even consider heading back to his car. What am I saying? Of course he didn't. James doesn't question the bizarre horrors that try to kill him, he just emotionally tears through them all. Brilliant. Eventually, we meet another character, Laura. Right off the bat, I didn't really enjoy Laura's involvement in the narrative. She kicks the keys, steps on our hand, and then disappears, only to later reveal that she hates us. Then why not just take the keys? Stop James in his path right now. Instead, Laura often leaves us in situations where we need to survive and continue exploring Silent Hill. Again, her characterization is exceptionally hard for us to find anything of merit in, at least for now. Poor assimilation into the narrative continues to be an issue in this game when we meet Eddie, but we'll get to him later. It seems, as far as the writers are concerned, the narrative will be carried by the sublime setting and malignant mystery, which happily becomes amplified when we enter what Kev told me was called the other world. I loved this transition. I can finally rationalise the breaks in reality. My expectations are completely thrown out the window. I don't know what is here, what might happen, or how I can escape. Having an alternate setting to offer unpredictability, tension, and a sense of vulnerability has been used by many writers because it works. So, this new environment was a much welcome inclusion. Pure tension builds as we find Angela again, lying on the floor in front of a mirror with a knife. This conversation being set in the other world was such a good decision. We don't know how this setting can affect the minds of those trapped within it. We don't know if this is reality or not. Whilst we can clearly see a tormented Angela suffering and descending into madness herself, James approaches her. Tactlessly, because of course he does. Read the room, James. Angela then becomes more sympathetic towards James, apologising and inquiring how his search is going. And it's here James decides to share some information with this young girl that was obviously going to unsettle her. He tells her that the person he is looking for, Mary, is dead. Angela, likely now concerned to be anywhere near this guy, decides to leave, despite James finally making the protective suggestion that they should stay together. Seriously, James, you jump-scared the poor girl, acted and spoke without any comfort or feeling in your voice, approached her again with the interpersonal skills of a wet sock, and then declared you're looking for a dead person. Are we supposed to not like James? Surely spending so much time with a character written to be so unlikable wasn't the intention? Surely? Angela in this scene is frighteningly well written. We learn so much about her, and her trauma is hinted at with compelling subtlety. She utters, "I've been bad," to herself, not only highlighting her youth, but encouraging us to want to take a more caring approach. But as James, we are limited to his actions. We are unable to offer the support we wish we could. We're confined by the third-person perspective, locking us into his frustrating demeanour. Moving on, with a much-needed understanding of why Angela might be wary around men, the first Otherworld section draws to a close. And here it is. We finally encounter Mr. Pyramid Head. I don't know if he has a name or if the creature is given some sort of title, but I'm going to go with that. Unfortunately, due to this clearly being something we are going to have to contend with throughout the game, I correctly assumed I just needed to survive for a set amount of time, which sucked all of the suspense out of the encounter. Eventually, Mr. Pyramid Head just leaves. Hang about, that's actually pretty clever. A looming threat lies ahead of us now. We are for the first time equipped with some knowledge of what lies ahead, and yes, I know we saw him briefly in the corridor, but I don't think we should have. He should have made his first appearance here, and as much as I'm sure we'd all love to see James die here and assume the role of anyone else, Mr. Pyramid Head opens a door for us, which is fairly kind of him, and we proceed. In terms of structure, I suppose we've now entered the next act and are continuing along the rising action section of the narrative, if I was to visualise this in the vein of Freytag's Pyramid, which has nothing to do with Mr. Pyramid Head. I'm just going to stop saying Pyramid now. Our expectations align with the chaotic setting. We will arguably no longer be surprised by the world around us. For me, this felt like a transition from being a reactive character to an active one. Instead of stumbling around, I began striding with purpose and unrelenting poise. James doesn't exude either of those things, so you too will need to inject that much needed energy into his character. Of course, I still got spooked a couple of times, but at least I had an end goal that I felt was attainable. Kill Mr. Pyramid Head. Unlike Mary's whereabouts, I knew this thing was here, I figured I'd see it again, and I imagined I'd end up fighting it before the resolution. Once again, as I've only got the knowledge the game has given me at this point, I didn't have the understanding of the significance of this enemy and its connection to James, but nevertheless, I confidently pressed on. I was now starting to enjoy where this story was taking me. The uncertainty of reality, the abject nature of the location and the creatures within it. It's getting good. Following an intriguing reveal that Laura knows of Mary, interesting, we finally encounter a stunningly captivating character, Maria. Drawing parallels with their appearances, their names, their admiration of James, I felt like Maria functioned as the perfect conduit for James's emotional trauma. I did begin to question if Maria was even real, if James was hallucinating some idealised version of his dead wife, if I had even left the other world. But these questions had to wait. Maria's presence elevated the narrative and stripped away the fearless energy I'd only recently become imbued with. Suddenly, I didn't know what to expect anymore, but I knew the inclusion of this mysterious Maria couldn't be good news for me. It's unlikely that your dead wife just has a double lurking right where you've gone to look for her, but serendipitously, Maria brings so much character to the plot. The way she talks, her confidence, her flirtatious attitude around James, which I considered may have had the intention to ensure that we felt as though we were betraying Mary, but I later surmised that she's possibly just a manifestation of his desire, the truth he wants for himself but no longer feels that he deserves. I'm giving James way too much credit here. I will say I was actually impressed with how I felt agency for the first time in the game. No longer was I just aggravated with James's actions, but I was actually trying to understand how he should be responding to this unfathomably overwhelming situation. Wait, sympathy for James? Surely not. It's very welcome though. Now, instead of lambasting his actions at every opportunity, I considered how I would respond, what I would do in this situation, and that only made me even more mesmerised by Maria's character, and suddenly understanding her was my priority. Eventually, Maria and James arrive at, a strip club. Now, not knowing whether or not Maria was real, I initially felt like she represented James's lust for someone that wasn't his wife. Maybe James and Mary weren't able to disturb the bedsheets. And to cope with that betrayal, his conscience manifests the appearance of Mary on this person. I began to wonder if James had betrayed Mary before her supposed death. But, more importantly, the game suddenly had me asking questions of narrative significance. Yes. With the writing gaining some traction and enthusiasm from me, James is reintroduced to Laura and Eddie, who now hang out. I imagine these two had been paired together because of the ways their characters differ. I wondered if they were diametrically opposed and what that could mean, or if I was supposed to see a brother-sister relationship between them. But I wouldn't make the argument that anything during this entire encounter added anything to either of their characters. In fact, if I'm honest, I forgot about this part of the story entirely when I was writing this. Moving on, the game increases the intensity beautifully. Maria and James head to the hospital as Laura is currently our best bet at finding Mary. Mr. Pyramid Head is back but plays a distant antagonist, which I love. It made me feel as though it knew James wasn't ready to face it yet, but I wasn't sure why. Like I said earlier, having a looming threat in the background is an incredibly effective way of maintaining a thread of narrative tension throughout the playthrough. However, as I knew both Mr. Pyramid Head and James wouldn't meet their end at this point in the game, I did think it was a shame to have separated Maria from us. We don't know her connection to Mary, we still have a plethora of unanswered questions. Her being at risk would have been incredibly successful at creating a feeling of anxiety around Mr. Pyramid Head's actions. We assume we're not going to die yet, narratively speaking, but we have no idea what this thing might do to other characters. And then it happened. In the other world of the hospital, both Maria and James are chased by this monster. Our priority is simple, survive. But thinking about James as a construct, something has been missing from his character that is ubiquitously used in literature to connect us with them. Loss. Now that might sound ridiculous, given that we have the understanding that James has felt he lost his wife 3 years ago, but that was experienced before we knew him. Therefore, Maria's character has a key part to play here, and I have to say the writers expertly utilised a genius method of ensuring James would feel something. They want him to feel the weight of a death, maybe even us vicariously. Now the death of a woman James just met likely would not be enough to carry the weight of loss required. James doesn't know Maria, his life won't be impacted by her death much, so the writers exacerbate his pain by the one tether he has to her. She has Mary's appearance. Her death was handled impeccably well, and as she was trying to get in the elevator, I was so invested in hoping she would be safe that I needed a moment afterwards. I did not enjoy this death. You can see the paralysing shock on my face. I felt her death and a sense of emptiness that came with it. Surely something similar to what James must have felt. Yes, I'm still looking for ways to connect with him. So, this went a long way to investing me more in his story. In fact, it might have been the first time I felt connected to James at all. Maybe his character would now develop as he processes this trauma. The impact of seeing his wife that he has already lost, brutally slain in front of him, must surely be something he deals with for the next few hours of the game. No? Just gonna carry on? Miss this opportunity? Alrighty then. Oh look, it's Angela again! Not looking like she's holding it all together. But I wonder how James, with his recent appreciation for how someone dealing with trauma must be feeling, how will he approach this interaction? Oh, look at that, with tactless indifference, because of course he does. Angela shares her fear and acceptance that her mother is gone. Powerful material that offers James yet another opportunity to endear himself to us. Now he does almost begin to be a comforting presence here. He even suggests going together, but decides to end this encounter by asking a question about the whereabouts of a little girl, returning the focus to his own motivations. Now I get it, James is a troubled character, consumed with his desire to find his wife. But I'd argue a seemingly heartless effort to show compassion, which he then immediately moves on from, is worse than if he had just said nothing. I mean, the tortured soul trope isn't going to work with James if we already want him to die. But let's not dwell on this again. After descending a very long staircase, perhaps to allude to our descent to sin, we arrive at a prison. Initially, there's not too much to say here narratively, as it begins with James solving puzzles and unlocking doors. In this superbly isolating and confining location, however, we do meet Eddie again, and the tension ratchets back up. James handles this conversation unfathomably poorly. He genuinely behaves like AI for the first half of it, before almost showing some emotion in his voice, stressing that murder is wrong. I mean, well done, James. I'm glad you can see that. Eddie runs off, and we're soon face to face with Angela again, and the revelations about her past are heartbreaking. We finally get an understanding of Angela's trauma, and it is awful. Honestly, I think we should take a moment for how well her trauma was illustrated. The conversation with her following the defeat of Abstract Daddy, great name by the way, cemented the outstanding use of melancholy and lamentation in this world. Angela breaking down as she voices the way her father forced her was hauntingly harrowing, truly. It felt like her words became tangible, her despair carried a tragic weight with it. It was one of the few times in this game I actually cared for a character. Angela seemed so visceral, like she felt the pain in every fibre of her body, so intensely and heartbreakingly real. But wait for it, our investment in the story is slapped out of us yet again by James as he responds in the vacant way he usually does before they go their separate ways. The writers, however, don't permit us much time to feel the weight of that conversation before surprising us with a reveal. Maria is alive. What? Honestly, this undermined the impact of her death for me. I preferred the emotional purpose of her character over the function of just shoveling more mystery in our face. She isn't treated like a hallucination here, which could have worked to slowly reflect James's guilt and any feelings of culpability for her death he may have had. Instead, I felt I had to settle on the conclusion that Maria must be some supernatural manifestation created by a personified Silent Hill to torment James. It's a shame, really. So, endeavouring to free Maria, James faces a series of puzzles and shenanigans that lead us to 3 empty graves. One for Angela, one for Eddie, one for James. A good use of poignant imagery that may suggest the fates of the characters are inescapable. The symbolism of James then jumping into his own grave provides a beautiful metaphor for how James's actions may be what is leading him to his death. But I feel as though it also functioned as a point of no return for James's character. This was it. You have cemented the path you're going down. No going back. I feel as though James should have been hesitant to jump in, and a cutscene here detailing his inner turmoil, how he's questioning the meaning behind this, would have gone a long way to bonding us with him as a character. Both James, and me by extension, should have to ruminate on whether or not we believe his fate is determined. But of course, James just jumps in. Then, after more traversal through the horrors of the labyrinth, James is forced to defend himself against, and subsequently kill, Eddie, which I was surprisingly happy to do. Eddie honestly felt like an inconvenience after the first time we met him, and the interactions with him and the contextualization of his trauma did not hit as hard as Angela's, not even close. Eddie's lackadaisically written descent into madness felt a little weak for me. It was actually Kev that pointed out to me that Eddie's the first human that we had killed, so the weight of taking a life for the first time was something James was confronted with. Despite how uninteresting Eddie was, at least now his character will serve the purpose of developing James's. Right? Right? Never mind, I guess. Well, with Eddie dealt with, James rows over to a hotel. The ambience and the narrative significance of this being where James and Mary had stayed previously is stunning. We again come across Laura, who is at least a little less irritating this time. James tries to be funny when suddenly the focus is put back on Mary. Laura offers James a chance to read a letter from her. It helps contextualise Laura's decisions in the narrative thus far and provide more insight into Mary's character, who just seems lovely by the way. But for me, what stood out the most was the allusion to James not being who we think. Learning Laura views James as unkind to Mary, and having Mary reassure Laura that underneath it all James is sweet, reveals a disturbing dynamic in their relationship. Was James abusive? In what ways was he unkind? Why was Mary so accepting of his perceived horrible nature? We've certainly been given no reason to champion James, but maybe that was the intent. The more I progressed through the game, the more I felt like I was supposed to hate James, but I wasn't sure why that would be the case because I don't understand why the writers would want us to hate the perspective we're playing from. Let's just move on again. James concludes that Mary must have been alive just over a week ago or so, due to the letter she wrote to Laura. We find that Laura has lost a different letter meant for James, and she runs off. Eventually, we come across a videotape, apparently that we left here, and it reveals a disturbing truth. It seems as though James killed Mary. Here we are. The climax of the narrative. What must be the big revelation. And once again, I was super confused. But this time the good kind of confusion. The kind where you're curious, yearning for an understanding of the events. There was some foreshadowing leading up to this that suggested James may have done something wrong, but I had no reason to suspect that he would have killed her. Therefore, I approached the final stretch of the game ardent to learn the truth. A truth that on a narrative level did not disappoint. Making my way back through the hotel, I listened to a tape which told me that Mary could not be cured, and the game decided that all the enemies would just die. Excellent choice. It was unsettling, confusing, but it also put me at ease once I realised I had nothing to fear. I imagine that this was because I only had one last fear to face. It had to be Mr. Pyramid Head. But before that, we find Angela one last time, and again, the tragedy of her character is written so beautifully. I really feel for this girl. James was frustratingly himself during the entire encounter. He is just the worst part of this game. He learns that Angela seems to always be consumed in flames, unable to escape the trauma of her past. A visually powerful scene which also suggests that her world, her life, has slowly been burning, taking away a small piece of her maybe with each passing moment. A pain that only increases with time. Angela walks up the staircase and, although it's ambiguous, I'm going to assume that given the grave she met the same fate as Eddie and eventually James. You know, death. So let's get to James's death because, for me, the narrative stuck the landing. I ended up finding a lot of ammo and coming across a not-so-subtle boss door. In I went, which I assumed would be my final fight. The entity I'd been waiting for. The entity the game had built me up to expect. Mr. Pyramid Head. Wait, there's two now? I'm going to be honest, I did not understand the significance of there being a second one, so someone's going to need to clear that up for me. And also, having Maria die again does not carry any weight. Maybe James keeps seeing her death because he can't forgive himself for killing Mary. If that is the case, at least we finally have some element of James's character that we can begin to explore. But after the fight, both Pyramid Heads decided to just spear themselves in the head, which visually was amazing. But in hindsight, I do wonder if they represent Mary and Maria now both being put to rest in terms of James's acceptance that Mary isn't coming back and that no one can replace her. I was not really sure what to make of it. After a little more traversal, James is confronted with a memory of Mary, and my understanding of their relationship is given some much needed perspective. James is reminded that Mary's illness led to her feeling disgusting, unlovable and unworthy. She hoped for death and demanded that James had to leave her. Now, you may have noticed I already did not like James, but here I began to absolutely detest him. The memory ended with me seeing how James heard Mary take it all back and how she gave a plea for help. She needed James and he knew it. The sorrow, the relatable feeling of being a burden to someone you love. It was also captivating, an excellent thread of the story. Finally, after hours and hours of searching Silent Hill, James finds Mary. We were then presented with a brief but tender moment of the pair which functioned to remind us of their past love. But James had seemingly come to terms with his actions and began to see Mary as Maria, who believed the two of them could make it work. I perceived this as James pondering if he could live within the confines of his own twisted mind, but ultimately James decided he couldn't stay away from his reality. He had to accept the truth. He did not forgive himself for what he had done. He was unable to live without Mary. This caused James to have his final confrontation with a manifestation of his trauma, and this scene would have been so powerful if we'd actually liked James in the slightest by this point of the game. Inevitably, James was confronted with acceptance, shown to us through the action of killing Mary again. I did not want to do this, which is a testament to how well written and portrayed Mary was, to be fair. I really felt for her. But the game needs completing. James began to experience some long overdue characterization, and I found it really compelling. He makes the decision to drive into the lake, joining Mary in death. The sort of ethereal love we've seen in literature throughout human history. James finally felt human to me. He finally created some emotional resonance, albeit way too late. Which is why, as James died, I didn't feel anything for him. Which is not what a writer would want or should want from their audience when writing a protagonist. But I will say, Mary's reading of her final letter was beautifully painful to hear. In fact, I'm just going to let it play. It's incredible.
Again someday. But you never did. Well, I'm alone there now. In our special place. Waiting for you to come and see me. But you never do. So, I wait. Wrapped in my cocoon of pain and loneliness.
Okay.
I know. I've done a terrible thing to you.
You really haven't, Mary.
I wish I could change that, but I can't.
So, she told us to leave.
I feel so pathetic and ugly laying here.
This is a tragic character.
Every day I stare.
We then
at the
left.
cracks
We didn't come back to
in the
help her,
ceiling,
but we did then come
and
back
all
to
I can
kill
think
her.
about is how unfair it is. The doctor came today. Told me I could go home for a short stay. It's not that I'm getting better. It's just that this could be my last chance. Even so, I'm glad to be coming home. I missed you so much. But I'm afraid, James. I'm afraid you don't really want me to come home. Every time you come to see me, I can tell how hard it is on you. I don't know if you hate me or pity me.
Yeah, I think
Maybe I just disgust you.
I think that's what happened.
I'm so sorry.
She was sick. She told us to leave. We did.
When I first learned I was gonna die, I couldn't accept it.
Then she did come home. That's probably
I
that
was so
homecoming room that we
angry.
saw with the
I
balloons.
struck out at everyone I loved.
And then when she
Especially
was
you.
home, that's when we killed her.
And that's why I understand if you hate me.
Out of
But
maybe
I
hatred.
want you to know,
But I don't know
I will
where.
always love you.
Oh,
Even though our life together had to end like this, I still wouldn't trade it for the world. Well, this letter has gone on too long, so I'll say goodbye. I told the nurse to give this to you after I'm gone. Which means that as you're reading this, I'm already dead. But that's okay. I'm not afraid of it anymore. I just hope the pain will end soon. So that you remember me for who I was. And not what the disease made me. I want you to go on. I want you to live.
oh, that's why he said, I know it's
For
not what you
yourself.
want. Okay.
And for others. Like you did for me. James. You made me happy.
That letter was written beautifully. Well, that was my narrative breakdown of Silent Hill 2. Honestly, it was wonderfully cathartic to explore the plot of a game like this. And obviously, this is only my response to the events, the characters, and everything else that I experienced. And I've since been interested to gain more insight from people that have researched the game, especially considering how unclear most things in Silent Hill appear to be. I've had a few conversations about the different endings and my preferences, and I'll be honest, I'm happy with the one I got. The in-water ending, I feel, makes the most sense for James's character and rationalises all the events that led up to it. And I'm happy to say I found the ending satisfying. I enjoyed the emotional weight to it. Now, the narrative began masterfully mysterious. evocatively eerie, so it's such a shame that James's character anchors a feeling of disappointment throughout the majority of the game. And if you made it this far and found my musings interesting or at least somewhat entertaining, then I'd like to give you a sincere and humble thank you for giving me your time. It's much appreciated. My decision to start this series was sparked by the fact I wanted to find a way to combine my enthusiasm for narrative and my enjoyment of gaming. And I've always been someone who looks into the narrative afterwards. I've just never written about it. But given how much I enjoyed this, I imagine I'll do it again. A few thank yous to give out. One to Kev for stopping by the streams despite his fear of horror games. Anyone who stopped in chat, especially I Got No Patience. The lore dumping was so helpful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. At the end of the day, I'm happy for any constructive criticism or things that I may have got wrong. Like I said, this was just my experience of the narrative. I didn't do any research when I wrote the script, so some of the nuances may be lost on me. I only went with the experience I had whilst playing the game. And the full playthrough of that, the full stream, is also available on the channel, so feel free to go and have a look. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day, and feel free to check out all the other content on the channel. Bye for now.